If you want to create a truly high-end car audio system, there is one thing for certain: you want it to have a digital signal processor. A DSP allows us to control time alignment, equalization, crossovers, and output level of each individual speaker in our system, giving us the full flexibility to tune the system for optimized performance. Now, JL Audio has long been known for their high-quality amplifiers that feature many new technologies that they have pioneered. Features that allow for extreme fidelity with low noise and high efficiency, all while maintaining a compact footprint. But although they had standalone DSP, until a couple of years ago, none of the amplifiers had DSP built in, and that's what they've now added with the VXI lineup. I have two of these that I'm going to be using in an upcoming build, so I wanted to do an amplifier overview. JL Audio was cool enough to sponsor this, and in this video we are going to start with doing an unboxing. We will take a look at the different features we can use to optimize our performance by using this amp, and we will do a test install to learn how to connect everything and do the initial setup. I'm Mark, welcome to CarAudioFabrication. Let's get started. In this video, we're going to be focused on the VX600/6i. Now what this 6 means here is that is how many channels are on this amplifier. This is a full range amplifier, but JL Audio also has the VXI lineup in subwoofer amplifiers and full system amplifiers. So let's start opening this up here, and while we're opening it up, I do want to talk about who and what this type of amplifier is for. So first off, the VXI lineup of amplifiers is for somebody that is looking for the absolute highest end performance out of an amp. So you can see in the boxing here, the amplifier is down in the lower section, and then we have another box we're going to take a look at in a second. And a quick side note, I did already, before I started making this video, I peeled off a protective layer of plastic that would normally be in here. And this logo here also comes in a separate plastic bag inside of that box. And the reasoning for that is so that you can line up this logo as needed based on the orientation of the amplifier within your system. So we're of course going to come back to the amplifier. Let's take a look at what's in this box. I will say I do like the presentation of everything here. This feels like it is a high-end amplifier that you're opening up. I mean, even if you look at this, look, they've got like this black envelope here. This gives us our information for registering our amplifier. We get some nice swag with the stickers there, and then also the amplifier instruction manual. And there is a lot to learn here, as this is a very powerful amplifier with lots of different options. I do like that in the manual here, they give you a very easy to understand diagram of all the different connections for this amplifier, because there are quite a few. We can see that this particular amp is 75 watts RMS, times 6 at 4 ohms, 100 watts times 6 at 2 ohms, and we can bridge each of those channel pairs for 200 watts times 3 at 4 ohms bridged. They also provide ratings at 12.5 volts, a nice damping factor there, and they even tell us the DSP processor type. It's an AKM, and it's processing at 24-bit at 96 kilohertz. A notable feature of this amplifier is it does have an RCA analog output, meaning we could DSP control an analog set of RCA outputs to a separate amplifier. In this case, what would be a good choice for that is this is our mids and highs amplifier, and then we add a second amplifier that doesn't have DSP built in, but we can still control that amplifier with the DSP inside this, send that signal out and into it, and it tells us right here that that gives us a 4-volt RMS output. Our next harness here is for all the signal in and signal out of the amplifier. As this is a 6-channel amplifier, there are 6 different inputs here, and we can use these as RCA low-level inputs, or we could also use these as high-level inputs. In other words, we could use adapters and connect straight to the speaker wires of an OEM system. By doing this, we would remove the need for a line output converter. This harness also has the RCA outputs we discussed for sending a signal to another amplifier, and you can see that they give us these nice caps to protect them. Finally, this harness has a remote output turn on, and it also has a valet mode trigger. We're going to talk more about these later. There's also this little accessory bag here, and I want to pull out these two guys right here for this harness that we were just talking about, because the other end of the harness here has this style of connection, and these go through right here in order to hold this onto the amplifier. You can screw these by hand, or you can use one of the included Allen wrenches that comes with the amplifier. And by the way, there's actually 2 different Allen wrenches that they give here for you, and it's the 2 different sizes that are in the bottom of our power connection. And then another small baggie of goodies that they give you here are these. These covers give our finished install a really high-end look because, as you can imagine, let's say we put our mounting screw down in there and we want to cap it off and have it look really nice. So these just go in just like so. And they also give us a nice little tool to remove them, which I think is super cool because we don't want to accidentally scratch these by using a metal screwdriver or anything like that. So they give us this nice little plastic screw and we can easily pop those out. The final package they give us here is for the USB cable because, of course, we need a means to connect our computer to our amplifier. It is worth noting that this cable is only 6 foot long, so for a lot of vehicles where you'd be doing your tuning in the listening position and the amplifier would be back in the trunk, you might want to consider picking up a longer connection cable. The Tune app is not only for Windows, but also for Mac computers, but you could also do your tuning with an iPad or Android tablet, but you have to have the VXI-BTC Bluetooth communicator. I know that lack of having Bluetooth built in is something that sometimes people will question, and you have to remember that with DSP, the idea here is that you're doing all of your tuning and system adjustment and then you're not fiddling with it. There are so many parameters here. If you're wanting to make adjustments on the fly, that's something that you're going to do on the source unit to adjust your treble or to adjust your bass. In fact, their DRC 205, which is the control knob for these amplifiers, this actually gives us 2 different rotary volume controls, and we can map each one to different functions. We'll talk more about that later, but as an example, we could use the little one here for our main volume control, and we could use the large one for our subwoofer volume control, and that way we have that independent adjustability. In my opinion, the Bluetooth feature really isn't needed all that much because every system I've had with a DSP in it, I connect to it, I do my initial tune, I might listen to it for a couple of weeks and then do another tune just to really dial things in, but after that, it's dialed in and good to go. The DRC 205 also gives us a push button and an LED indicator. We're going to talk more about that later, but I do want to tell you guys that there's also another option. There's the DRC-100, which is a single knob, but it also gives us an LED so that we know what preset we're on. We can use that for different functionality with the amp. They also have the VXI hub. The hub is used if you have multiple VXI amplifiers in a system. That way you can network to all of them and control all of them in one tuning session. But with that said, if you did have multiple amplifiers in your system, you don't necessarily have to be connected to all of them at once. You could connect to each one individually and do your system tuning. So now we can move on to taking a look at the main feature, the amplifier itself. Now, first impressions straight out of the box, you'll see that it has this nice brushed metal look here on the top with that kind of dark black. It has this sort of pewter looking color. And the other thing I noticed right away is this amp has a lot of curvature to it, especially if we pick it up and look at it from a side profile here. It's a really elegant, nice looking amplifier. Even this side panel here, you can see that it's glossy, you can see the reflection. It just really has a nice high-end appeal. If we look at this side here, which is opposite the side of all the connections, you can see the JL Audio name there. The other sides are just nice and smooth. And then even the back side here of the amplifier, you can see that it has this kind of embossed pattern. I kind of wonder if this pattern is to help with some of the heat distribution, just because with the added surface area, that way you're going to get more heat transfer out of the amplifier. But either way, definitely super nice looking. And the other thing that strikes me right away about this amplifier is how small and compact it is. The depth is about 6 5/8 inches or 168 millimeters. The width here is about 9 7/8 inches or 250 millimeters. And then the thickness, the overall height of it, is 2 1/8 inch or 54 millimeters. To give you a bit of a comparison to a real world object, there's a tennis ball right there. And here's my hand, which is larger than the depth of the amplifier, nice and compact, so it would be easy to fit multiple of these in tighter locations within a vehicle. Now next up, I want to get this amplifier connected and powered up so we can do some testing. So let's go through all of these here and get everything connected. From left to right, the first connection here is for all of our power connections. We'll want to use a 4-gauge power wire, connect our positive lead to the battery with a fuse, of course, and then we'll connect the ground to the ground of the vehicle, and then we'll connect the remote to a remote turn-on lead from our source unit. If we take a look here in the manual though, this amplifier has 3 different turn-on modes that we can use. The first is the conventional remote connection where you connect to your source unit. That way the source unit tells the amplifier to turn on, but there are 2 other options. The other 2 options are going to monitor our inputs coming into the amp. And the first is DC offset, and what that does is it turns on when it detects the presence of a small DC signal in OEM audio outputs. The second of these 2 options is the signal sensing option, and this automatically turns on by detecting a full range, in other words, all the frequencies of an OEM audio signal coming in. A couple of notes here though, when using those options, it's going to look for that signal on inputs 1 and 2, and it's going to work best when detecting a high level signal. In other words, when we're connecting to the speaker wires of an OEM system. And another note, you'll notice the amplifier has no switches on it whatsoever. So in order to enable these options, we do need to power up the amplifier and connect to it with the Tune software in order to turn on those settings. So what you could do is you could just simply run a small jumper from the positive lead here to the remote and have it constantly on for just your programming of the amplifier. That way everything turns on. Once you enabled those settings in the software, you would then remove that jumper for the final installation. The next connection port here is for the JLID COM port. This is going to be if you're using that Bluetooth communicator or the VXI hub. Next is the JLID control port, and this is going to be for connecting our control knobs. This connector here is for our analog audio inputs as discussed earlier, and don't forget that on this harness you also get that remote output, which allows us to not only turn on something like another amplifier, but we could use it for turning on a relay that controls lights or controls cooling fans, lots of different options with this extra turn on lead. And then there's also that valet wire that we discussed. Remember that this allows you to enable a valet mode, which can help you protect someone from abusing your system, or you could do something unique where imagine you had a convertible and you wanted 2 different separate tunes. You could wire it so that when the top was down, it would enable this trigger and switch automatically to a separate tune. Kind of a cool added feature there. Underneath that connector is this little door here that we can open with this rubber cover, and this gives us access to an SD card slot and 2 little reset buttons. If we push the one on the right, it allows us to reboot the amp, and if we push and hold the one on the left, it allows us to reset the amplifier back to its factory condition. There is no SD card in this from the factory, and according to the manual, that slot there is for service and future expansion. Just a few more connections to talk about here quick before we get into testing. The first of which is our USB connection. This allows us to connect to this amplifier with our computer. Next is a digital toslink input. This allows us to send a 2-channel signal into this amplifier with a sample rate up to 192 kilohertz. And then there is a digital output. This digital output gives us a super clean 24-bit 96 kilohertz signal, and it is worth noting that we can control this output with the DSP software. And the last connection here is for the speaker wire outputs, which is simple enough. It's worth noting though that part of the reason they were able to keep this amplifier so compact is there's not a whole lot of actual wiring connections on the amplifier. An example being this is a pigtail here. So something to definitely consider is that you can only cut this back so many times. You could always buy a replacement of these if need be, but you're going to want to be careful with your wiring when you're making your connections that everything's good to go so that you're not having to cut back this wiring. Now that we have all the connections made, we can get into testing, and I do want to give you a quick rundown of what my test bench is. This is basically a car audio system outside of the car. You can see that we have an aftermarket head unit here, and remember that this amplifier works not only with aftermarket head units, but also with OEM stock head units based on if you're using the RCA line levels to send signal or if you're using the speaker level signal from an OEM system. So that's our main source unit, and we also have a set of component speakers. Now normally when I'm just using this in the shop, I power these component speakers with the head unit, but in this case I've disconnected those connections because instead what I want to do is I want to power them with the amplifier. Now I've bypassed the passive crossover because we're going to use these in active mode, meaning I'm going to have channel A on that tweeter, channel B here, channel C, and then channel D. I'm telling you guys all this because this is going to be important when it comes to setting up our amp. Now these 4 speakers make use of only 4 channels, and obviously this is a 6-channel amplifier, so for those last 2 channels I could power, for example, a set of rear speakers. You could use this amplifier to do a full 3-way setup where you have tweeters, mid-range, and then woofers. You could also use those 5th and 6th channels and bridge them and power a subwoofer. The point here is there's a ton of different options based on how you set up this amp. All of this is powered off a car battery here that I still need to connect, but essentially a full car audio system just outside of the vehicle so we can do our test bench install here. And we're also going to be using my computer here in order to connect and set everything up. Now, before I turn on the amplifier for the first time, and especially since we are running these active, we don't want to potentially blow our tweeters. So before I power this up, I'm going to disconnect all the speaker wire connections, which it's really nice that this is just one simple plug, very easy to do. So I'll flip my switch here on the test bench to simulate the remote turn on. And there we have it. We have a blue status LED light that has now illuminated. Now, I always really like when amplifiers have these status lights because it allows us to know what is going on if there is potentially a problem. So that's definitely something you're going to want to take a look at if you pick up this amplifier here in the manual. There are a lot of different status codes that correspond with this LED light and also on the COM port and on the control port. And although this light here is blue from the factory, we can change this light to match our install. We're definitely going to have to try that out. I've powered back down and I'm going to make my USB connections here to my computer and I'm going to start programming this thing, and we're going to hop on over to my office so that I can show you guys what I'm doing. So to get started with the Tune software, we need to go on JL Audio's website and we're going to download the application or the program. Now, Tune is completely free to download, and what is super cool about this program is you can actually download it and try it out before you even have an amplifier. In fact, I'm not connected to the amplifier right now, and I'm going to run you through this simulation mode, which will still allow me to create a file that can then be saved to the amplifier. So in this case, we're going with our VXI simulation, and we have the VX600/6i. Now, when you do first connect to a real amplifier, it's automatically going to download a firmware update if need be. But once that's done, when we come into the program for the first time, this is what it's going to look like. Now, what's really cool about this screen is as part of our Tune file, we can load in a project name, the make and model, the owner, installer, and we can also add additional notes. This note field allows you to add quite a bit of information, which I find to be very powerful because especially if you're a shop or if you're doing multiple different installs, you can put a bunch of system information in there. And then when you go and you pull this file back up onto your computer and you load it from the amplifier, you're going to be able to see all of that information. So once that's done, we're going to click Next, and that's going to bring us to our configuration of our inputs and outputs. Now, you could pick blank settings here, and once we get past this page, we could do everything on our own, but what is nice about this page is it allows us to quickly set up our system the way we need to based on the system design. So for this example, I'm using a 2-channel left and right input into the amplifier, so we'll select that on our input side. And then for the outputs, you can see that there's multiple different options here, and again, remember that you don't have to use one of these options. You could do your own thing once we get past this page, but let's look at some of the different options they have already set up for us. There would be a 3-way where you have a 2-way component up front and then rear left and right speakers that are passive. You could do a 3-way where you have tweeters, mid-range, woofers up front with the sub pre-out. That's a pretty common system. There's another 2-way and 3-way version here. And then finally, the option that I'm going to pick in this case, we're going to be doing a 2-way system where we're going to do tweeters on channels A and B, but then we're going to have our mid-range woofers bridged on C, D, and E, F. So this is super nice because once I pick that, they give us some initial values for our crossovers. We of course can change all of this, but this is really nice because it helps us prevent potentially hurting our tweeters once we get into the application. Now I'm going to start breezing through a lot of this just for the sake of time, but if you guys would like to see a more involved video focused on using this application for tuning, let me know. You'll remember that this amplifier has that dual volume knob connected, so what we can do is we can pick which of these speaker outputs we want to be impacted by each of the knobs. So in this case, this is pretty normal. You would have everything turn up on that little dial with the main system volume, and then you would have the outer dial control just our outputs for a subwoofer amplifier. The reason it asks for speaker distance here is we can plug in our values, and that's going to allow the amplifier to do the time delay. So we will now click OK. Now the first screen it's going to bring you to is the Tune tab here, but I want to go back and explain each of these sections to you. So the Network tab, if we had multiple amplifiers, you can see right here we could add another amplifier. We can control all of these if we're using the VXI hub. We can control them all at once. And the other thing you're going to see here, these are the 10 different presets that you could have along with the Valet preset. As we start adding all of these up at the top here, we will start seeing them in here and we can color code them. So I'm going to do that actually right now. Let's add preset 2 and we'll call it no bass, just so that we can do a test later. And if I enable this preset, I want this preset to be yellow. So what that will do is now when we change presets, our little dial is going to change colors based on that color we picked, or we can even have our amplifier badge change colors, or we can have it stay the same. If we did add another amplifier here, you'll notice that it also gives us now a full system mute. We could mute everything at once, or we could unmute that. We can mute each of these amplifiers individually, and there's also this ID button, and if we click that, that will make the logo on the amplifier that you're currently tuning, it will make it flash. It just makes troubleshooting a little bit easier. Let's get rid of this second amplifier for the time being, and look at more of our 6-channel options. So now here on the Setup tab, we can see our inputs, and then we can see all of our outputs down here. And what are these lines? These lines are essentially viewed as connecting wires. So what's going on here? Let's look at this signal path. We know that we want the left input channel to impact our left speakers. So you can see if we follow this line and the connections that have been made, it goes to our left tweeter, and that left signal also goes to our left midrange. That makes sense, and it's the same thing for the right signal. Right signal comes through here, it's going to go to the right tweeter, and it's going to go to the right midrange. Now, what else do we need that left and right signal to? Well, we need it to go to our signal outputs, and you can see that that goes through this equalizer right here, and it goes out left and right. I really like this because it's very visual and easy to understand what's going on. Now, if you do notice, this is our equalizer section here, and right now there's only 2 EQs being applied. EQ number 1 is on both the left speakers, and EQ 2 is on both the right speakers. Now, let's say we want to change things up a little bit, and instead of just using these 2 equalizers, we want to have an EQ for each of these 4 speakers. What we can do differently is let's activate these 2 EQs here, and then I want to bring the left input into channel 3 right here. So that's going to go through EQ number 3. And then I want that to go to my left mid-range. So I'm going to click that and I'm going to delete this node here. So now you can see signal comes in, left input, goes through EQ3, goes out to left mid-range. Let's say I want to do the same for the right mid-range here. I'll add a node. And then I will add a node and delete this one here. So now we have an EQ for each of these individual speakers. Now, another question I had right away about these amplifiers is how do you set the gain level? And if we click this button right here, that's going to open this up here. And remember that we're in simulation mode, so you're going to see these colors flashing right here, but this indicator will be green, yellow, or red. Before we get into our level setting, it is important to have all of our speakers muted. And I forgot to mention this earlier, when you do first come into the software, it automatically mutes everything. And we can turn off the mute by clicking this button right here. As a side note, we can also use the spacebar on our computer to unmute everything or mute it back up. I really like that. That will definitely come in handy for tuning. We've got everything muted, so now, according to the JL Audio training team, what we want to do is set our input level to minimum, and we want to play a frequency-appropriate sine wave based on the system that we're setting up here speaker-wise. We're going to play that sine wave at 3/4 volume on the source unit, and we're going to start stepping up through the input levels. Now, what we're looking for is we want these lights to light up a solid yellow. Once we get to the point that they're at a solid yellow, we are good to go. If it was red, even on the lowest input setting, what that means is that you have clipping at your source unit and you need to turn it down. Now, once that is set up for each of our different inputs, later when we get into tuning, we can do level adjustments for our different speakers. As an example, we could link the 2 tweeters together by clicking that button there, and it's probably likely that we're going to want to dial back this tweeter performance a little bit, and you can see we can do so, or you could unlink them and do them individually, or you could link everything in the whole system if you did need to back off a little bit. Now, I also want to point out that when we do click this flyout in order to adjust the input levels, this is where we have our different options for the remote turn on. Another note, everywhere that you see names for the inputs and for the outputs, you could highlight that and you could type in a new name. Now next, we can move on to the Tune tab. The VXI amplifiers give you a parametric EQ, which means that we can move the EQ point around, and we can also adjust the Q and the gain. We can type in values as needed. Parametric EQs give you infinite flexibility on tuning the system. You can really dial things in. It's a little bit more advanced though. If you do want to get started with just using what you're used to with a graphic EQ, you can click this button here, and you can see that this gives us a 10-band graphic EQ for each one. On the parametric EQ, if need be, we can turn off some of these nodes if we only need a few for our adjustment, or we can turn them back on. Tons of flexibility here. For the crossovers, if we click this logo here, this gives us a quick representation of the different outputs on the amplifier and the frequency bandwidth that is going on there, just to give you a graphic representation. We can pick from a wide variety of different crossover slopes. In this column here, the colored section gives us a quick representation of the bandwidth of frequencies that are covered by those channels. So we can see quickly, this is the high end, this is the mid-range, and then this is a full range signal. More valuable graphs here, we can see the group delay with all of our time delay that's going on. We could also click and change our graph here between these three different sections. So this is the overall output response. Remember that we rolled back that output on the tweeter earlier, so we can see that representation there. We also have the quick ability to add an all-pass filter. We can change polarity for each of these channels individually, or we can link them together and switch together. If you guys haven't quite caught on to the theme yet, there is a lot of flexibility. Now the final section I want to go through really quick is all these buttons over here. This first button will allow us to create a new project. We're already in a project right now. We can open an existing project, we can save our current project, and I want to point out a cool feature about the saving in a second here. We can transfer the project to VXI, and what that means is we're going to take the project and transfer it off of the computer into the internal memory of the amplifier. That way it has it stored once we disconnect. We can open up that project settings tab if we need to, again, to change this information, and there are a couple of other cool features here. First off, let's say that you're getting a mega turn-on pop because the amplifier is coming on too early in the system turn-on process. You can actually come in here and you can add some delay. Remember that remote output lead that we have out of the amplifier? We can also create more or less of a delay for that. This is also where you're going to find that badge illumination configuration where you can either pick your color and adjust the brightness as need be, or you can have it determined by the preset color that we selected up here. Now let's say we make some changes that we don't like. We can go back to the last restore point, which you could do right here with this button, and then we can also select and rename the device. Now, as far as the program goes, if we click our program preferences, this is what I wanted to refer to earlier when I was talking about the saving a backup file. We can make this program automatically save backups of our tune every 5 minutes or less, or even longer. It's definitely a super nice feature to have, and especially if you've ever accidentally closed a program without saving, we can even turn on this setting here that it will automatically save everything before you do that. Tons of options here for how the EQ looks if you guys want to change your units over to metric, even the date format. They've even have this high contrast color scheme, which this is better if you're tuning a boat or something outside and you really want the screen to be bright so you can see it. An absolute ton of flexibility. If you guys would like to see me teach more about this program, let me know. Now, once we've done everything on the computer and set it all up the way that we want it, the way we can write it to the amplifier is we go up and we go to exit, and then it's going to pull up this screen here, and we can go ahead and just double check that our project is saved, and we want to make sure that we hit this yellow button here for transfer, and that's going to write everything and store everything on the amplifier. So once we disconnect with our computer, everything is in there. We can go ahead and quit, and now we are good to go. We have fully tuned this. So if you remember, we've programmed our DRC here so that this inner knob is volume control. So that turns that up, and then we don't have a subwoofer connected, but we could always use that for our subwoofer level control. And let's try changing presets here. So preset 1 is red. If we hold in, there we go. Preset 2 is yellow, which also changed on the amplifier. And remember that we can have it programmed so that this color stays the same or it matches the preset we're on. So now we're on preset 2, so this should have a lack of the bass on the mid-range speakers, which I don't know if you guys can hear it with the microphone set up right now, but there's definitely a lack of mid-range. Let's see if we can bring it in. I'm gonna switch presets. There we go. So it's all working as it should. Now, the unfortunate problem that I face when making these videos reviewing this gear is it's hard to give you guys the full experience of how awesome this all sounds. That's because you're hearing your speakers that you're listening to this video through, and you're not hearing what I'm actually hearing here real world. So you're gonna have to take my word for it that I am very impressed with the way these amplifiers sound. Everything is very detailed. The sound is incredibly dynamic, and I've noticed that even at higher volumes, it doesn't seem like the amplifier is having trouble keeping up. So let's turn up our volume here. With all the tuning flexibility built into these, I'm confident I'm going to get these to sound amazing in the build that I'm using them in, that Wrangler build. And keep in mind that JL Audio has a bunch of different proprietary technology that is built into these amps. You guys can read the more descriptive version on their website, but I'll give you the quick breakdown. Their Next D2 switching technology really prevents crosstalk between channels and helps this to be a really good sounding amplifier. The next feature is advanced rollback protection, and what that means is if you're really hammering on this amplifier, I mean, after all, we gotta enjoy our tunes, this amplifier will monitor if it reaches an unsafe operating temperature, and it will adjust its operation automatically. And one of the final major technologies built into this is the differential balanced inputs, so that's your signal inputs coming into the amplifier. Modern vehicles can create a lot of electronic noise in that signal path, and by using those differential balanced inputs, it helps this amplifier to reject all of that noise and sound awesome. So for your next high-end car audio system, if you're looking for amazing sound quality, full system tunability, all in a compact package, definitely check out the VXI lineup. You can learn more about these amps at the links down in the video description. I am so excited to use these in the upcoming Wrangler build. It's gonna sound awesome. If you guys wanna follow along with that build, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. And again, a special thanks to JL Audio for sponsoring this video and build. Thanks for tuning in, my friends, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.